everybody. To finish off my week of lovely lightweight Porsches, we're coming right smack bang up to date once again. After travelling through the past with the 996 GT3, the 964 RS, and lastly the 3.2 Carrera Club Sport, we're now sat in this 2018 911 GT3 RS. Now, the last RS that I drove was actually a 997.1. That's a very different proposition. The last modern GT3 that I drove was actually the 991.1 that my friend James owned. It's a fabulous car, extremely exciting, engaging, wonderful on the roads, however, not without fault. My major issues with that car were the fact that they were a lot of money. People were asking more than list price for them, despite the fact that a lot were being made. And as far as I was concerned, it was possibly a little bit too stiff to enjoy on the road. Now with this GT3 RS, you already know it's pretty much the fastest thing out there. It's one of the very few cars that can claim to have done a sub 7-minute lap at the world famous Nürburgring. In fact, after a couple of laps, this thing is probably quicker than even a 918, because the 918's batteries will run out, and that means it's actually left with not a lot of power and quite a lot of weight to pull along. And the 991.2 RS follows very much the same pattern as all of its ancestors. Add a little bit more power, take a little bit of weight away, sharpen it up, and you've got yourself a perfect track-focused 911. So highlights here include plenty of carbon fibre, the wing, the bonnet, you've got bits of magnesium all over the place, you've got a titanium exhaust, you've got ceramic brakes on here, and a pretty serious aero package, including those amazing arch vents, which Porsche themselves said they weren't quite sure if they could get away with, but somehow they did, and an ironing board nailed to the back. Now, this car's lovely owner, Donald, is a man after my own heart, because he spec'd this car himself, and he wanted a nice bright colour for it. This particular shade is known as Lizard Green, and he's actually been very tasteful with it, because despite the outrageous exterior colour, he's tried to then tone it down just a little bit by putting a few black accents on the car, and the interior doesn't have the colour-coordinated cage, but it does have colour-coordinated stitching. It is really a rather special thing. Now, my thoughts on the 992 are very well known. I don't like it at all. But the 991.2 was a car that I actually really did enjoy. And this is about as special as you're ever going to get. I know the GT2 RS then sat above this, but in all honesty, it's not really a car that I was that interested in. And crucially, even in the hands of the world's best drivers on the best day with the best possible support, the GT2 is actually only a few seconds quicker around the ring than a GT3, which does raise the question, why would you ever bother with a GT2? They were a heck of a lot more money, even if you were one of the lucky people that got to pay list price for it. This car, as specified, came in at about £165,000, making it actually cheaper than a current 992 Turbo S, or at least cheaper than the ones that seem to be doing the rounds. Now, with the regular GT3, the debate continues to rage on as to whether the manual or PDK gearbox suits the car best. However, as the RS has one purpose in life, to be very fast, they were sold exclusively with the PDK box. And I have to say, it is utterly sensational. Even at these modest speeds, as we're dealing with a little bit of traffic and getting the car warmed through, it's really sharp. Very nice to use. And you may or may not have noticed that this car sounds proper too. Those gear shifts are ridiculously quick, and that gearbox is mated to the fairly familiar 4-litre flat 6. Punching out here, 520 horsepower and revving to 9,000. know people will always go misty-eyed over the engine design by the late Hans Metzger, but believe me when I say that this DFI unit is absolutely every bit as special. It just makes continuous, smooth, linear power all the way to that red line. It doesn't feel ridiculously savage, it feels very controllable. And indeed, actually, the car is quite surprising me, because I was genuinely worried that it was going to be a really firm riding, unpleasant thing, even on pretty decent roads, but actually it seems pretty well set up, and it's closer to the 997 than I thought it was going to be. The RS, it would appear, is one of those cars that you really do get to know pretty quickly, and I'm sure it takes quite some time to really plumb the depths of what it has to offer. This, as far as I'm concerned, is a genuinely great 911. The steering is nice and light, and okay, it can't match, say, the Carrera Club Sport for ridiculous feel or tactility or chassis engagement at lower speeds, but that is always going to be the price you pay for a car with such ludicrously high ability. Mercifully, this car is also another one that actually gets used. My biggest issue with the GT3, and in fact most special Porsche products in the last few years, has been the fact that they've been traded as a commodity rather than driven and enjoyed like the cars that they are. And I was doing a little bit of research, and a couple of people have theorized that Porsche have made perhaps about 8 times as many of these as they did the original 996 GT3 RS. I still haven't had a crack at one of those, so if anybody's got one, I'd love to try it. And one thing with the 911, which I've always known but has become very apparent having filmed so many in the last week, is that that engine has been very slowly creeping forward every time there's a new one. When they went from air to water cooled, it jumped forward a bit, and then when they went from 997 to 991, it really shifted along. In fact, the 911 is probably now only a few inches from being mid-engine, and that does change the dynamic of this thing considerably. It means the car has a more natural balance. It doesn't feel quite so dominated by the rear engine layout. You could very easily and accurately say that it feels a little less 911-y for it, and that is true. But it still feels special, and it doesn't feel the same as, say, a McLaren. Now, if you were thinking about buying one of these, and let's say you're looking in the sub £200,000 segment, I would say something like a McLaren is very much going to be on your radar. A 488 Pista is still going to command about £300,000 and is a very different car again. The 458 Speziale, similarly, they've also held their money very well indeed. So you haven't got a lot of choice if you do want a fairly hardcore, track-orientated, lightweight car. The 600 LT would be the obvious comparison, and I have spent a fair bit of time in one of those. The McLaren is a lot faster. I really do mean that. It weighs less than this, has probably about another 80 to 90 horsepower. It's torquier, and it's just a machine. It's absolutely incredible. The McLaren also has sensational steering, and I'd say actually it's probably neck and neck with the 911. But the engine in this does make up for its comparative lack of firepower with a sublime soundtrack, a ludicrous flexibility, and the sort of feedback and interaction from the motor that we're really unlikely to see very much going forwards. In fact, so far, it's only Ferrari that have managed to make a turbocharged engine that actually really excites me. The £6,500 optional Porsche ceramic brakes are actually very nice to use. I haven't had to stamp on them, and frankly I don't think I'm likely to on this road, but they are very easy to modulate and they are not grabby. They are way better than those that Ferrari are using at the moment, and indeed even Aston Martin, who of late seem to be struggling a bit with their ceramics. Now, believe it or not, this is actually a very good road for testing the exact thing I was worried about with the GT3 RS. Like I said at the start, we all know this thing will decimate any track day you take it on. But it's the other stuff that I'm always worried about. For me, if I was able to own one of these cars, I would certainly want to take it on track. But in practice, I'd probably do most of my driving on the road, and nobody enjoys having their fillings shaken loose. Now, Porsche did put some helper springs in the front of this car, and they do seem to be doing their job. The last car I drove with those, I recall, was the Renault Sport Megane, the current generation one, and again, that's a car which should be punishingly stiff, but just wasn't. More cars should use this setup because it works really well. This is a car in which it is very easy to do very large speeds very quickly. It's not unique in that regard at all. Bentley Continental GT will do that. You push an old Montego out of a helicopter and it'll do that. But it doesn't necessarily make it exciting or engaging. This car does have a bit of delicacy to it still. You can still do that. Now, what it doesn't have is a lot of texture or feedback. It's just missing. In fact, I would say probably the 991.1 is probably a bit better on that front. And that, frankly, is not necessarily a failing of the electric power steering system in here, which, frankly, Porsche are still the best at. That's just what happens when you stick massive 265 section-wide tyres on the front of a car. You will lose the delicacy. McLaren, to give you an example, put two 2.5s on the front of the 600 LT, and those, I think, might actually be too narrow, but the reward is a little more feel through the steering. They also have committed to a hydraulic steering setup as well, and that does make a little bit of a difference. Now, in the interest of science, I'm going to put the suspension into sport mode temporarily, and you definitely can feel a difference. In fact, this road that a minute ago felt nice and glassy smooth, it turns out isn't at all. And as I've got visibility, I pull myself over into the cat's eyes. That one was fitted by a man called Barry. And mercifully, this car also has a litany of electronics and things in it to keep you from looking like a complete tool, even if you are. But I have to say, I didn't expect this to be a reasonably livable thing, and it actually is. You've got a reversing camera, not standard. You've got very nice LED headlights, not standard. You've got dual zone climate control. There's enough sound insulation that at motorway cruising speeds, you're not being deafened or anything like that. And I'm really quite shocked that this is a really livable package. Now, if you're not interested in going super fast and you want a road going 911, is this the one to buy? Well, that is a tough question. If you want a modern car, yeah, I'm pretty sure the regular GT3 is going to be supremely confident as well. I personally absolutely adore the crazy looks of this thing, but it's a really competent road car. However, if you are looking for the ultimate in driver involvement, the ultimate in feedback, the best thing at 60 mile an hour, you do want an old car. In fact, of all the cars I drove this week, it would be a tie-up between the 964 and the Carrera Club Sport. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's exactly what they are good at doing. But this car does give me hope, because too often now I drive not even such hardcore vehicles, which are far too stiff, far too noisy, and just unpleasant on the road. And so I'm very happy to report that the 991 GT3 RS is a very fine, well-balanced car. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all for the next one. Bye-bye.